Hi there folks, I'm Arran Topalian and welcome back to another episode of Game Design Live. For any newcomers, Game Design Live offers you live interactive design deconstructions of a video game as it's played by a game designer, where we call out cool little design details along the way or chat about the potential reasoning for certain design decisions in a game. So if you're into game design in general or into a certain game and want to understand it better on a design level, this is the place to be. So yeah, welcome back. This is going to be a two-parter episode on probably one of my favorite games of the last sort of year, potentially even longer, is Hades, Supergiant's Hades, who have also done games like Bastion and Transistor and Pyre. If you haven't played them, I strongly suggest you check them out, especially since it's quite interesting to see how Supergiant has evolved in their design from Bastion all the way through to Hades. Strangely, a huge fan of isometrics. Not strangely, it's kind of cool. I'm a big fan of isometrics as well. But all their games have been isometric, so it's interesting to see how they've sort of evolved and borrowed bits and pieces from their previous games, bringing them all the way up to their latest release. So yeah, this is going to be a two-parter. The first part, the first episode, which we're having tonight, is going to be on the sort of early game of Hades, so we're going to be looking at that. And the second episode, which will be next Wednesday, will be on the sort of late end game period of Hades, so we can look at the sort of the later mechanics and systems that the game introduces to keep you playing and keep you hooked. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. We're going to start a brand new game straight from scratch. So if you're new to the game, that's fine. We're going to go through it together.
Few tales are told of Hades, whose very name inspires fear and penitence, reminding us of the inevitable fate which we all share. I, however, mean to tell you such a tale. Listen carefully.
Goodbye, Father.
Cool. So for anyone who isn't familiar with Hades or doesn't know much about it, it's an isometric hack and slash roguelite. So isometric relates to the camera angle, which is the sort of top-down camera angle. Roguelite relates to essentially the genre, which normally involves you playing across a number of different sessions, and throughout each session usually there's sort of the aspect of forming a build, what's known as a build, which is the formulation of randomly given powers and buffs and abilities as you try to piece them together to make something cool. A lot of the time it involves you then dying and not quite getting to the end of the game, and then being reset back to the beginning, losing a lot of the stuff that you earned during that run, but earning something that lets you upgrade in a more permanent way, which makes you a little bit more powerful going in for that next run. The premise of Hades as well, again, for anyone who isn't familiar, is you play as Zagreus, this handsome chap right here, who is the son of Hades, who is desperately trying to escape the Greek underworld. So when you first start the game, there's, whenever you start any run for that matter, you're started off in this sort of opening section, this opening area, which is sort of like basically their sort of kickoff zone. It's used every single time for every single run. And normally what happens is you're given a boon of some sort, you're given an upgrade. You're not given it for the very first time when you play a session, but normally you're given some sort of upgrade when you land in this area, and the reason for that is that it gets you going from the off. Like you're immediately given a building block that you can use to start building and crafting a build. And also, you know, for first timers who are coming to the game for the first time, this is the perfect kind of area to experiment with the controls. This is something that Mario 1 did to great effect when they designed their game. There's no sort of like onboarding tutorials or for 2E slides, which we've talked about before. You're just given this nice sort of open, free, empty space to run around, get used to the controls, and figure out what everything does on the controller. Cool. So whenever you exit a room, you'll notice that the door has this sort of icon on it. These icons change, so every time you go to exit a room, there's going to be different doors that we can take to exit, and each door has a different icon on it. And as you play the game, you slowly start to learn what these different icons mean, which basically allows the player to choose a reward for themselves. Like, it's a way of allowing the player to decide what they want to take as a reward when in the next room, if they complete the next room. So this does a couple of things, right? Like straight off the bat, this offers a level of autonomy, and also a really clear sort of reward loop for the player, where you're always getting something. Like for any kind of roguelike that you might have played, whether it's Spelunky or Curse of the Dead Gods, there's not always necessarily a guarantee that you're going to get something. Curse of the Dead Gods is maybe not the best example, but in a lot of roguelikes, let's use Dead Cells as an example. There's not always a guarantee you're going to get something, or you even necessarily know when you're going to get something cool and powerful. In Hades, they break that right down. It's a room-by-room setup where every single room offers the player something. So there's a very clear reward loop in place. So let's go ahead. So when you open the door, it breaks, and that means now that I've subscribed to this room, and if I finish this room, I'm going to get that reward. So let's get that reward before talking any further. This is the first enemy that Hades presents players with. I cannot remember the name off the top of my head. But there's a couple of interesting things going on with this enemy, right? Like straight off the bat, it's big, but it's also slow. It also offers very clear attack telegraphing, so you've got a nice big wind up to the attack to let you clearly kind of read what it's going to do. It flashes, so that's something else that the developers have consciously put in is a flash. Hades, as we're going to see as we get into the game, is a very fast-paced game. So being an isometric game, the developers have always been aware of the fact that it can be more difficult to keep an eye on everything all at once because there's a lot going on. So the enemy flashing just offers a little bit of extra clarity on when that enemy is going to attack. I think as well that when the enemy is attacking, there's a bit of a rule around rotation, which is that before they flash, they will keep rotating to face you, but as soon as they flash, they lock in direction and they stick in that direction during the attack. It's also cool to kind of call out why this enemy is designed the way it is on a visual level. It's always quite a large enemy, and that could potentially mean a couple of things, right? It means, one, that it kind of matches the speed of its attacking. It's a big enemy, therefore it's kind of slow and sluggish, so that pairs up quite nicely. But also it's bigger, so it's just easier to hit, which means it's a little bit more fun for us as first-time players coming to this for the first time. And also, it looks more intimidating. So when we inevitably kill it, because we know we're going to take it down, we're going to feel a little bit better about it. You can also see the enemy spawning there in Hades. Enemy spawning is quite interesting as well, where enemies can be spawned from anywhere through the use of these sort of portals that can appear on the floor, which is a really interesting decision for a couple of reasons. One, it means that enemies can be spawned anywhere. The level designers don't have to worry too much about putting down spawn points anywhere in the map or in different levels. Enemies can spawn anywhere in any arena, so it's a very flexible system. And also, more from a gameplay standpoint, it also means that players can't attack enemies or attack them as easily as they're spawning. And thirdly, it also allows players to get a sort of a read on where enemies are going to spawn before they spawn. So they can almost sort of start making a decision of what they're going to do, where they're going to place themselves before the fight even begins. And fourthly, actually, while we're on it, you can see the size of the spawn circles varies as well. So some of them are larger, some of them are smaller. So again, it gives players a chance to sort of guesstimate maybe what kind of enemies are going to spawn where. And again, make a better sort of more informed decision about what they're going to do. So yeah, so when we came into this room, we saw that icon at the front of the door. And this is the icon now we're being presented with which is this. So we're going to go ahead and accept and see what happens.
To be her. Then here goes nothing. In the name of Hades, Olympus, I accept this message.
Hail, noble cousin. Now, let's get you from that miserable place. I'll see that all of us upon Olympus do our part, beginning here with me.
So, straight away we're going to give a sort of a sense of context for why these gods are doing what they're doing. They're clearly not very big fans of Hades, they're not very big fans of the situation that we, the main character, find ourselves in, so they're looking to help. And I think this is one of the coolest aspects of Hades just in general. There's a lot of cool things in Hades, but one of the coolest things for me, at least, as a roguelite, is the way that its narrative reinforces and contextualizes everything in the game. Why do I keep dying? Or sorry, how do I keep resurrecting when I die, for example? Well, it's because you're a god, so you can keep resurrecting over and over again. Or, what's the excuse for getting different powers in each run? It's because it's gifts from Olympus who want to help you escape because no one likes Hades. So this contextualization appears over and over again throughout the game. And just stitches the whole thing together really nicely. There's no sort of abstract or sort of random rules in place, the rationale for which is just because. It always loops back into the narrative and is reinforced by the narrative. So yeah, whenever you complete a room, assuming that you signed up for that kind of reward, you get what are called boons. So these are essentially what we talked about at the start of the episode. These are the rewards, or one of the rewards that you can be given for completing a room, and taps into, or is sort of how Hades offers players the chance to create a build. We've talked about builds before, and create, or more specifically, a synergetic build. One of the main joys of a roguelite is that it's almost like a slot machine. Every time you do a run, it's almost like pulling the lever and hoping that the right pictures almost line up in the right order. And you're waiting for that sort of 777 to roll in. So every time you get a choice of 3 to avoid what's called information or choice overload, which we can talk about more in a bit more detail in a second. But you're given 3 choices every single time, at least I think every single time. So yeah, you've got your attack is stronger and can deflect. Your cast damage, okay, and your dash deals this. Okay, we're going to go with attack. It's also interesting to note how they go about explaining information in their game. So any kind of like keywords are emboldened, but also they use these really nifty little sort of like boxes on the right-hand side to break down every single bold word in the sentence. So again, without any need for tutorials, because there's a lot of information going on here right now, especially for a new player. And they're offering all that information in a very neat and organic and clean and quick way, so you're not having to stop and read tutorial slides over and over again, or watch videos or whatever else. You're just getting the information straight to you.
I know you can't hear me all the way where you are, Goddess, but thank you.
Cool. Okay, so now we're being offered another reward, which is the key.
Fight me.
You'll notice as well that when you complete a fight, or when you kill the last enemy of a fight, the entire combat slows right down, which is another nice, really clean, crisp way of just clarifying to the player, hey, the combat experience is over. You've done the thing, without relying on on-screen UI or any kind of like big messaging. Let's take this. We're going to find out what these do later. Okay, again, there's only one door. That's fine. While we're on the subject, actually, so you'll notice that consistently so far, we've come in from the bottom left or right of the screen, and then exit through the top left or the top right. And again, that's a very conscious choice on behalf of the developers, or at least I assume it is. It definitely helps create a sense of forward momentum. And also, it doesn't create the sense that you're going around in circles. You know, like you're not coming in from the bottom left and exiting from the bottom right, and then the left and the right, and it feels like you're kind of going in a loop. You're always moving essentially up, which makes sense in a way because you're sort of slowly coming up through the different layers of the underworld. It's very subtle, but you'll notice that when you hit enemies, there's a very slight shudder to them. They sort of vibrate. That's a bad example because it was hiding behind a wall. This guy, though, it's very slight, but they sort of shudder, and it's just a tiny little bit of feedback to tell you or reinforce the fact that you hit the thing. And again, everything is contextualized by little sort of like floating tooltips and whatnot to tell the player what everything does.
Each exit has its own reward.
Cool, so this is the first time we've been given a situation where there's 2 different rewards to pick from. So as we spoke about, this doesn't just create a sense of autonomy, but it actually does a few things. It creates a much clearer, tighter game loop, or reward loop rather, for the player. It's a very quick lesson to teach them where you finish a room, you get to pick a reward. And again, it creates a very clear sense of when your next reward is going to come. You're not, in other roguelikes, for example, you're not sure exactly when that next reward is going to land. But in Hades, that's not the case. You have a very clear expectation of when that's going to happen. And also, even better than that, is that players can then create their own goals. As you get further into the game, you can start wondering, okay, do I want to farm for keys or do I want to farm for darkness? So offering this kind of structure has several different benefits and advantages. In this case, we're going to go for keys.
Louts.
So again, another big, slow enemy. The game starts you off in the first world in a really kind of soft environment.
Right there.
We're going to go ahead and pick this. There's something else I want to call out, so we're going to go in this room. What I also really enjoy about Hades, and I really appreciate, is the fact that they make the rules for combat really quite clear, namely in terms of attack cancellation between the player and the enemy. So, whenever I hit the enemy, I will always cancel their attacks, unless something happens. Yes, here it is. So, I will always cancel their attacks if the enemy has just a regular old red health bar. Nice and clean and clear and simple. Enemies with a yellow health bar, these are known as these are known as armored enemies. And the main difference is that armored enemies cannot be attack cancelled, and also you have to get through their armor before you can start damaging them properly. So you can see here, this guy does not care a jot about my attacks. He's just going ahead and attacking me anyway. So not only is that a nice, clean, clear rule to connect, if you see, i.e., if you see yellow, attack cancelling is not allowed. But also it encourages further use of the dodge in the game. The dodge is a very important part of Hades. Hades in general is a very fast-paced, fluid, frenetic almost game. And having a type of enemy that doesn't respond to attack cancelling means that we're encouraged even more to use this dodge, which we're going to have a closer look at in just a second. As soon as I'm done not dying.
A divine arrow.
Cool.
There's only one heavenly archer I know of. Well, several, really. Anyway, in the name of Hades, Olympus, I accept this message.
I heard about you. Look, I'm not like all the others on Olympus. The power of the hunt helps keep me company, so maybe it'll help you too.
So just something else to call out there as well is the fact that whenever you're having dialogue exchanges with other characters in the world, these exchanges are incredibly snappy. Odds are that you'll only see sort of like 2 or 3 dialogue exchanges between characters. So you're never kept out of the action for too long, and more importantly, you never have control taken away from you for very long, unless you're doing something like making a choice, for instance. And again, that's a very intentional thing. We saw with the GDL episodes on the Ascent, for example, that a lot of the time when you're talking to NPCs, you get a big old massive dump of text. And if you're into that kind of thing, then power to you. But personally, I find it much more refreshing to just have a little bit of text that gets the point across, is very well voice acted, and then gets you right back into the action. So it's a really clear, interesting choice on Supergiant's part. Cool. So, I mean, why not?
Hunt sounds like good company to keep.
We'll see as well that, every so often Zagreus will offer these little sort of quips, namely contextual quips. So he'll say something in response to something the player has done. And he's not the only one. Every character in the game, especially the gods that offer you the boons, have the capacity to do this. They will remember things you've done in the past, and they'll comment on it when you come to them later on, which adds an awful lot of depth to what is essentially a 2D game. An isometric game at that, which maybe doesn't offer the same sort of level of immersion that a 3D world does, because you're not actually walking around inside in that world, just sort of looking down onto it. So offering that kind of sense of reaction and reactivity to your own actions is a really cool way of just making the world feel a bit more alive without the benefits that come with a 3D experience. Oh, I remember this. So I'm not gonna lie, Hades is a challenging game. I have heard people saying, things like it's one of those games where you really have to kind of like die repeatedly to beat it. But I have also read that there are people that have beaten it in 8 minutes flat with no deaths whatsoever, so it's possible. It just so happens that a lot of us suck, including myself. But it can be done.
Had enough.
You'll see as well the music sort of has a tail out at the end, so the music obviously ramps right up when we're in a fight, but then ends with this sort of guitar, electric guitar fade out at the end, just to wrap up the music, which is quite cool. So again, like with the slow-mo, clearly indicates that we're in and out of the fight.
Name of Hades.
So again, you've got some rarity going on here with the boons. Just add a little sense of luck, which can sort of help with, you know, that sense that we talked about the slot machine concept for roguelites, and that's exactly what this is. You know, when you're spinning that, when you're pulling that lever and the wheels are spinning, sometimes you hit a 7. And in this instance, the flank shot epic is a 7, which we're going to take, because why not?
I'm hurt. Can't heal myself, but I can fight. Numbskulls. Easy. Set.
So yeah, let's talk about the dodge a little bit. We mentioned that we're going to talk about the dodge, so let's talk about the dodge. In other roguelites, you know, different games do things differently. Hades being a very frenetic, fluid game, there's no sort of stamina mechanic to restrict your use of the dodge. There is a timer, so if you press the dodge button, I think if you're hitting it quite fast, like every 3 presses, you can get to dodge again. So there is a timer, but it's an invisible one. There's no stamina mechanic. And the reason that most games may often offer this to players, rather than put some sort of restriction on their dodging or evasion or whatever it is that they offer players, is because the developers want you to use it more frequently, right? And it also lends itself to a certain type of experience. It's a frenetic and fluid game, all about staying on the move, dodging enemy attacks. So by having this kind of dodge that allows you to do that, they facilitate that kind of experience. But also, even more interestingly, is how the dodge interacts with enemies, which we're going to check out right now. And there's also a very conscious choice. So these guys here, for example, you know, if we dodge into different bits of terrain, we can see that we can dodge right through that terrain. We're not blocked by the terrain. We can actually dodge right through it. We almost turn sort of like transparent in a way, like we become like mist. And the exact same thing applies for enemies. We can actually dodge physically right through enemies, which lends itself well to a couple of additional mechanics we're going to be seeing in the next 10 minutes or so. But it sort of creates a less physical feeling game and more of an arcadey, twitchy experience. And Hades very much is that kind of experience. It has a very clear target audience in mind, and caters to that target audience very well. Like if you were to hand this to a 7-year-old, they'd probably have a pretty rough time. Or maybe not. Maybe 7-year-olds are just that skilled now, and I'm terrible at comparison. But yeah, it feels like it's more sort of like at least 15 up. Whenever you're designing a combat experience, there's normally sort of 3 main pillars that a combat experience rests on. You know, and depending on how they are shaped and tweaked, the combat experience of your game, assuming it's a hack and slash, will vary dramatically. So the first one is a sense of weight, like how heavy things feel, like how heavy it feels to move, how heavy it feels to attack, how heavy enemies seem to be. The second one is pace. So how fast you move, how fast enemies move, how fast you attack, how fast they attack, how your dodging is set up, so if there's any additional mechanics around your dodging, all of which, you know, affects the pace of the game. And third is enemy AI, or your enemy's design, so how smart enemies are. In some games like Halo, for example, enemies are incredibly intelligent, whereas in games like Hades, they're a little bit simpler in terms of their, you know, how aggro works or how they interact with each other. And the weapon design itself, you know, to some extent does matter when it comes to designing your combat identity, but is perhaps somewhat less important than those first three components. You can give the player a stick and still kind of tweak those first three different areas to create a very distinct combat experience. The weapon you're giving them is more the tool that they're given to solve the problems you're presenting them with.
Where now?
This way. We talked before about what an isometric camera angle is as well, you know, what isometric means. I'm sure most know, but, you know, just to cover bases. But yeah, an isometric camera, like every kind of camera angle has its own pros and cons. For example, we talked a second ago about the fact that isometric maybe doesn't offer the same level of immersion or world immersion that a third person or a first person camera might. But on the flip side of that, it does offer players a far greater sense of the combat, the battlefield around them. They've got a far better sort of bird's eye view of all the different threats and potential problems that are coming their way, so they're able to make sort of like more informed decisions based on that information. But because of that, the pace of Hades goes really well with an isometric camera. I find it quite difficult to imagine what this level of pace of game would be like in a third person, or even a first person for that matter. But being an isometric camera angle, the pace goes exceptionally well with that kind of camera angle. So we talked before about conducive design, you know, design that follows on or leads well from another aspect of your game's design. This is a good example of that. Also, just to kind of call this out, boons offer quite an interesting piece of UX. You'll see here that they have this sort of beam that comes up from them. Let's go back over here. So they have this sort of, like, in this instance, purple beam. And the reason for this, again, is just to help players identify where it is. It's almost like a giant arrow pointing down to where the beam, where the boon is, to tell them, hey, it's down here, just to make sure they don't lose it. Because I think, okay, yeah, you can't even exit the room until you've actually picked it up. But just to help them find it in case they lose it, it's got this sort of very tall beam on it, which I think Diablo 3 does as well with legendaries. I mean, let's do this one.
They're armored.
What's especially cool about Hades as well is that it manages to find ways of incorporating mastery in very simple ways. So you'll see every so often, for example, if I manage to hit an enemy against a wall. Nope, didn't manage to do it. Let's try this. Yeah, nope, not that either. Oh, it's harder when you're trying to do it.
The underworld's power.
But normally, you have body slams, so you have the ability to sort of knock enemies into walls and slam them against objects, or even push them into traps. And these are all little extra ways that players can master the game. So it's just small little ways of increase or heightening the mastery ceiling in the game. Which one?
Charon's shop.
Actually, let's just touch on that. So you saw this massive pile of pots over here that I just had to come over and smash. There was no reason I did that. Hades doesn't sort of do the thing that a lot of other roguelites might do, where, or even other games do for that matter. The Ascent, for example, definitely did it, where by smashing pots or crates or whatever else, there's a chance that something will spill out of it. Hades doesn't do that. And you might ask, well, why? What's the reasoning for doing that? Why not just give me some gold, man? And the main reason is that if a player learns that a pot may contain gold, the odds are that they're going to go ahead and smash as many pots as possible to find that gold. It creates a kind of a behavior in a player that you might not necessarily want. So by simply just saying, look, do you know what? There's no gold in the pot. Players aren't going to waste their time doing that kind of thing. They're going to just focus on whatever it is that you want them to focus on, which in Hades' instance is playing the game.
Quite a bit.
Fries.
Why, good to see you, Charon, mate.
So yeah, every so often you'll come across these shops in a run. They're run by Karen. For anyone familiar with Greek mythology, you'll know him well. And every time he'll offer you, again, 3 possible rewards to pick from, which you can spend gold on. And gold is a currency that you'll earn during a run, and then when the run ends, you lose all the gold that you've accrued.
Well, this is awkward.
Halt, Zagreus. Not one step further.
Come on, Meg. Haven't we had more than enough of each other by now? Besides, don't you have someplace else to be?
Your father sent me. All in all, I'd rather be on your bad side than his. Now you can turn back, like a good little man, or I can send you home the painful way. What'll it be?
I'll have to go with the painful way.
A man after my own heart.
So yeah, within the first 5 minutes, we've ended up fighting a boss. And to be fair, within the first 10-20 seconds of the game, we were fighting enemies. So Hades does a great job of just putting the players straight into the action. Its onboarding experience is very strong in that sense. You're not waiting around to see what Hades has to offer. There is plenty more that it does have to offer, to be fair, but in terms of what its core experience is, it showcases that to players very quickly.
Stay right there.
If it looks like I'm doing well, it's only because I fought this boss quite a few times at this point. Normally this thing would be destroying me. Oh boy. It doesn't help the twitch. The twitch bar is right in the way of the boss's health bar. I have no idea how I'm doing. Which is maybe a good thing.
Much as a toddler to me.
So yeah, for anyone watching the VOD, this is Game Design Live. This is the first episode on Hades. We're having a second one next Wednesday at the same time, same place, 9 to 10 BST. I shouldn't be talking right now when this is happening. But yeah, if you're enjoying the content, please do follow the channel. Please do check out my Twitter, which is at Arran Topalian, which I tend to keep full of all the good game-related news and gaming-related articles, or things related to game design in general, just to stay well informed as it's my job. So please do check it out or give it a follow if you're enjoying the content. Damn it. That's what I get for talking during the run. But that's okay, because that's meant to happen, or probably meant to happen. And now we get to have a look at the other aspect of Hades, which makes it even cooler, which is this aspect. So whenever you die, you're sent back to what is essentially Zagreus' home, I guess you would call it. This is where the man himself, Hades, lives. You've got a few different characters as well that you get to know over the course of the game. Hades essentially offers a sort of and this again is I think one of the most innovative areas of Hades, and potentially what helped it do so well, is it offers a sort of like a figure of 8 game loop, where you're going around one loop, which is the gameplay loop, where you're running through a dungeon and you're creating a build and you're doing all the combat and all the cool stuff. And then you're going through this other loop when you die, which is sort of chatting to the characters of the underworld and getting to know them, and also forging a deeper bond with them through gifting them, I forget what it's called, I think it's called nectar. And nectar can only be earned by, well, it can be earned in a bunch of different ways, well, 2 ways I think in particular, but the main way to earn it is by playing the game. So these 2 loops are connected, hence the figure of 8 metaphor. Or analogy, or whatever the word is. So yeah, it's a really interesting way of kind of creating a very clean, clear flow between the 2.
Welcome to the House of Hades, where... Wait, I know you. Guess that means you died out there, huh? Well, don't be sad, though. Pretty much everybody dies sometime.
Some of us more than others.
So again, like we said, really quick dialogue. That's literally 1 line of dialogue and a small quip from Zagreus himself. It's not a huge bunch of text or spiel that makes you stand there for ages. They very quickly establish this rule that dialogue is kept very short and snappy.
Hades, that dark and lavishly appointed.
You know I can hear you, old man.
Good to see you, lad. Despite the circumstances, remember your
And fear is for...
I'm just going to skip through this. We can't check out the gifting just yet, but we are going to at some point.
Boy, I told you nobody gets out of here, whether alive or dead. So how was your wanton ransacking of my domain?
Greetings, Father.
Be on your way.
Let's just skip through this. Cool. Oh, I can't stay and talk next. I got things to do.
Hey, room. I'm back.
So this is the Mirror of Night. The Mirror of Night is essentially what we talked about before, where roguelites offer some means of progressing permanently in between your runs, and that's exactly what this does. So here we can see that we earn darkness to buy these different sorts of upgrades, and these different upgrades allow us to buff up in different kind of ways. But not only that, but there's another thing we have to collect to get more potential upgrades, which are keys. So there's a couple of different reasons why you might want to do this. Like, why not just have from the get-go that all the rewards are offered in one go? And the main reason is that it offers more reasons to replay a run. Is that, you need different commodities to do different things. So if you want to get more powers, you need to go and collect keys. If you want to upgrade those powers, you need darkness. So it's another reason to keep playing. It's something else to earn. It's another commodity to go off and fetch and collect. So we're going to go ahead and upgrade. Where is it? It's not there. No, this is it. Yeah, backstab. Cool. Yeah, this is what we talked about with the dodge, being able to go through enemies. A big part of that is because you can deal what's called backstab damage, where if you attack them from behind, you deal additional bonus damage. And again, that's another good example of how Hades introduces just small little ways of introducing additional layers of mastery into the game without relying on things like complex button combos or anything like that. Rather, a lot of the mastery is purely environmental or passive, but it's something the player can bear in mind when they're playing, without relying too much on things like I say, more complex inputs and whatnot.
Okay.
So yeah, if you hadn't known already, Hades offers a bunch of different weapons as well the player can use to use in a dungeon run. When you pick a weapon, that's you locked in for that weapon throughout the run, so you can't switch during the run. And this is especially cool because it not only offers more progression. We've talked about progression before and the importance of progression in the game. Both extrinsic and intrinsic progression. Extrinsic progression being where you can actively sort of see things getting better in the game, and usually that means it's a number of some sort going up. But also there's intrinsic progression where the player themselves feels themselves and sees themselves getting better. Competitive games like Fortnite and Overwatch, you get examples of those. So yeah, Hades introduces again different skill ceilings to progress through by offering different weapons, as every single weapon works in very different ways. So you start off with a sword, which is sort of like a basic all-rounder, and then you have the spear, the shield, the bow. These two, if you don't want to know, I'm saying now spoilers, just skip ahead like 10-20 seconds. If you don't mind knowing, then great. You also have the gauntlets, I think, which go here, and a gun, like a machine gun kind of thing, that goes here as well.
There we go.
Let's go ahead and get this.
Remarked, the Heart Seeker. Let's deal some damage. Psst, over here. What the?
So yeah, these weapons offer what's essentially completely different ways to play the game.
Yeah, keep going.
And they will also eventually, they're also something we can eventually level up through Titan Blood. Weapon progression actually in Hades is a really interesting area we're going to talk about for a real quick sec. So to level up weapons, the only way to level up a weapon is by imbuing it with something called Titan Blood. And Titan Blood is earned by defeating bosses with a weapon for the first time. I think it's for the first time. So for example, if I go ahead and use the sword and I kill all, I think it's 4 bosses in the run with a sword, I'll earn 4 Titan Blood. If I want more Titan Blood, I have to use different weapons and use those weapons to slay the bosses, and that will allow me to unlock even more Titan Blood still. Now, normally that might be something that kind of makes people recoil, like that sounds like a terrible idea. Like, what if I just don't click with the spear? What if I don't click with the bow? That sort of locks off progression because I just, I don't resonate with a certain weapon. But what's interesting is that Hades makes a very, very slight adjustment to their weapon progression versus everything else. progression in terms of just raw power, what we've talked about before is vertical progression, is used via darkness, this currency here. And darkness you earn just by playing the game. You don't need to be good at the game to get darkness. You just have to play it and you will earn darkness over time. If you're good at the game, you'll earn more darkness, so you'll earn it more quickly. But you only have to play it to progress and earn more power. When you upgrade your weapons, we'll probably see this in the second episode. Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of water. Bet you all enjoyed listening to that. When you're upgrading weapons, that doesn't involve the weapons themselves being upgraded in terms of power. The way they fight, their sort of combat characteristics, that is what changes. It's not they deal more damage. So because of that important distinction, it means then that Supergiant haven't necessarily locked power behind mastering different weapons. They've included both vertical and horizontal power progression in their game.
Nice place you got. I don't remember. If you insist.
Amazing. Okay, let's crack on. Can we use this yet?
No keepsakes yet.
We cannot. Let's talk about this later.
One more time. Thunder. Is this really him? Okay. In the name of Hades, Olympus, I accept this message.
It's purely just a little sort of like extra fact. But I do remember reading somewhere that with all the text in Hades, between the contextual quips and everything else, Hades has more text in it than the Iliad and Odyssey combined, which is a staggering amount of words, just, to comprehend. But because of that, the game feels, like we say, a lot more alive and responsive as a result.
Greetings there, young man. Look, your father's always been rather difficult, and he's not so much as called in quite some time. You'll have a better home where you belong, here on Olympus. And to help you on your journey, have my blessing.
Lord
Why not?
Zeus lending his support. Never thought I'd see the day, or night, whatever. The chthonic key. Dust.
Ow.
Coin from the dead.
So we may not get onto it this episode, but there are a bunch of different ways that Hades offers progression. They offer progression really in spades, where the player can upgrade the environment itself, which is namely their home and the dungeon. They can upgrade keepsakes, which are sort of trinkets or sort of relics, I guess you'd call them, which also offer their own sort of progression system. The weapons themselves, which you talked about. You can progress your relationships with the different characters in the game. There's also something called minor prophecies, which we'll be looking at in the next episode, which are sort of like passive goals that you can either just have ticking away in the background, or you can actually seek out to try and complete actively. So there's a lot of different ways that Hades goes about offering progression for the player, which in a roguelite is especially important, I would say, because in a roguelite, obviously, you're experiencing an awful lot of loss. Like, we've talked about this a little bit before, but loss aversion is very much a thing, where the sense of loss is at least two times more intense than the experience of gains. So losing progress is quite an intense experience for a player in general. So offering them lots of different ways to feel like they're making forward progress, even though they're repeatedly dying and losing progress during a run, is a really interesting way of sort of counteracting that experience.
This can unlock something back home.
Let's go ahead and take this. Sure.
Your Highness. Hey, Princette. Must look like I'm slacking off with the old boulder here, but I was just getting back on my feet. The Fury sisters don't often leave me be. Where'd they go, anyway?
What's also kind of cool about Hades is just the fact that you're given a very interesting main character to control. In the Ascent, we talked about this a little bit, especially in comparison to a game like Diablo, where in Diablo you assume the role of the hero. You assume the role of, albeit a fairly blank hero, but a hero nonetheless with a backstory that's offered for every single class. And in Hades, you're offered, you know, the son of Hades, the son of Hades, which is already a pretty interesting prospect. And between the characterization of Zagreus, the voice acting, it's quite a fun character to assume the role of.
Thanks for stopping by.
So again, for anyone watching the VOD, this is the first episode of GDL on Hades. We'll be looking at the second episode next Wednesday, 9 to 10 BST. We'll be looking at the late to end game content of the game. If you've been enjoying the episode, please do follow the channel. It's a new channel, so I'd hugely appreciate it. You can also check out my Twitter, which is @Topalian, which is linked from my Twitch channel itself, which you can check out for a lot of game-related news and articles. This one, why not?
You're out well past your curfew, boy.
So yeah, this is a sort of like a random challenge that every so often pops up. Run variety is a very important thing in any roguelite, where you're looking to try and create very kind of fresh experiences each and every time. And to an extent, different combinations of enemy definitely help with that, as well as different room layouts and traps and everything else. But Hades offers just this extra layer of variety with these sort of challenges. The only thing I'm not 100% keen on about it is the fact that it's timed. You can see what I'm doing right now, for example, is I'm literally just running out the clock. So I don't need to fight these guys to win, I just need to survive for X amount of time. And right now, for like 45 seconds, I've just been running in a square, and I've been absolutely fine. So it does feel a little bit like it would have been nice to have had maybe some sort of challenge as part of that, you know, maybe like a kill X enemies or kill all these enemies to pass, which is, to be fair, what players normally have to do anyway. But yeah, I do find that the time challenge is a little bit strange in the sense that I don't really feel like it is a huge challenge, especially compared to the normal challenge of Room, which is to kill all the enemies. If anything, having to just wait out a timer is, by comparison, easier.
Vitality.
Which is maybe the case.
I think I hear the river. Kieran's shop. I'll pay for that.
You know, one thing I'll say for Charon there, he doesn't talk too much. And since neither do you, I'm letting you have this.
So this is a great example of the contextual quips that we're talking about. We've unlocked this boon in Charon's shop. So Artemis is aware, or feels aware of that fact, and is mentioning Charon's name in her dialogue. So again, it just feels a lot more responsive and alive as a result.
The hunt is on. Tombstone, just great.
Oh boy. What also creates another big aspect of run variety in Hades is the builds themselves. So in this example, we can see that because we picked one of those boons earlier where we create chain lightning with our attacks, this guy's little sort of extra minions are getting killed pretty damn quickly, which he sort of relies on to do anything kind of meaningful. In another run, we might not have taken that boon, and the combat experience would have been completely different as a result, where maybe we would have had a bit more focus on the little ones, and it wouldn't have been quite so smooth sailing. So build variety in Hades is a massive part of creating that variety.
Revelry?
Hey there, Zagman. How's it going? Look, you have got to get here with the rest of us.
I mean,
Leave it to
this
the
one.
to liven things up around here. Wretches.
We talked before about the figure of 8 game loop that Hades offers players between game session runs and being at home. So those two different circles, those two different loops, and how they feed into each other. This can help a little bit with what's called Newtonian engagement in game design, which essentially relates to, you know, a player will continue, or an object will continue in a direction until it meets with some sort of resistance. Which we're going to talk about a bit more in a bit more detail in terms of the studies that have been done around this, because it's really interesting. But yeah, so because there are ends, obviously, to the experience of Hades. When you die, that's quite a very kind of categorical full stop on the experience. But you're put into another loop. It's not just your run ends and you're starting from scratch. You're starting at the start of another part of the figure of 8 loop that Hades provides. So it doesn't quite feel the same way as maybe other roguelites do, where the experience feels a little bit less broken, because it's rather than just sort of ending the loop and putting you right back to the beginning, it's feeding you into another loop entirely, and giving you a whole bunch of other different jobs to do as a result. But yeah, this is something that has been studied in quite a lot of detail, or at least some detail, Newtonian engagement, where they did something called the SOUP study, which I'm just going to talk about in these last few minutes because it's kind of interesting and kind of weird at the same time. So this has got nothing to do with Hades, but it's interesting and can be applied to game design. So there was a study a while ago where 2 different groups of people were given 2 different kinds of setup with soup, as the name might imply. One group was given bowls of soup, which they could ask to be refilled every time they finished their bowls of soup. The other group was given bottomless bowls of soup, where the bowls would actually refill themselves as the person ate the soup. In that group, in the second group, the group with the bottomless bowls of soup, there were instances where they had to end the study for health and safety concerns. Like, people would just keep eating the soup, and not stopping. And the reason is because there are no what's called re-evaluation points, or there were no re-evaluation points in place. And re-evaluation points are things that we as humans do, where we hit a certain juncture in an experience, and the brain sort of has a chance to catch up with itself and check in and say, hey, am I still hungry? Or hey, am I still wanting to do this thing? And it's a big part of the reason why, you know, a lot of the time in certain games that we even don't necessarily enjoy all that much, we can't help but keep playing. And the reason is because, well, it's very possible that part of the reason is because that game is hiding its re-evaluation points a little bit better than others might. So yeah, in terms of Hades, like, you know, I've known people to have, like, you know, 3-4 hour long sessions with Hades, where they just can't stop playing. And part of that, I'm sure, is down to the fact that it's just a fun game to play. The combat experience is very tight and very distinct, very responsive. But another part of the reason that we say could be because there are better disguised re-evaluation points where the game filters you in from one game loop, which is this, the combat experience, to the other. Let's just show it off now. To the other, where yes, you die. There is this point where you stop, but you then go into this other aspect of the figure of 8 loop that we've talked about, where you're now in sort of social mode, which feeds into the gameplay mode, because by doing that social aspect of the game, you can earn extra rewards that help you in combat. Well, we can't right now because we don't have the right things, but trust me, when we start earning nectar, as we will see in the next episode, which will be on the late to end game content of the game, so we'll sort of fast forward a good, 8 hours or so, 6 or 8 hours or so, then we can have a look at these other systems at play.
I'm growing stronger. Excellent. Hey.
So this time we're going to take the bow just to show it off a little bit.
All right, one more time. That looks like a
So yeah, we talked about this at the very, very start of the episode, where this room, what's essentially the safety room, always provides players with the initial building block. So when we first saw this room, there was nothing there because it was the very first time we played. This time around, it's given as a reward straight away for free. So straight away, we're able to start making choices about how we want to develop our build. You tend to find as well that humans tend to care more about the things they make a lot of choices over. So offering a choice straight up when the game run kicks off is a really interesting way of ensuring they're latched into that experience, because straight away you're making a choice at the very, very start.
Daedalus, wherever you may be right now, thank you.
What's also cool about the weapon design is that each weapon design offers different types of mastery. So with the sword, it's really about positioning, but overall it's a fairly accessible weapon. Whereas with the bow, a lot of it is very much down to, well, a little bit rather is down to timing. Timing is not something you really have to worry about with the sword. You swing the sword and it does what it does. With the bow, you press and hold the button and you can see there's a flash. There's a moment where you flash. I'll do it again. I missed it that time. See it there? So timing is something the bow incorporates, which, the sword and other weapons don't, and offers just, again, another way for the player to progress intrinsically as they play. It's a new way to get better at the game. What's especially cool about the environments in Hades as well is that they are destructible, but more than destructible, they actually allow players to do additional ways of dealing damage to enemies. So these things, for example, these statues, you can see that if you damage them enough, they sort of disintegrate and drop boulders that can actually hurt and damage enemies. So again, another layer of mastery that doesn't rely on learning any kind of complex inputs and controller buttons, which games maybe like Mortal Kombat or Devil May Cry kind of lean into harder. Let's go with this one. What's also cool about the way that Hades does its progression, or rather its during run build progression, is the fact that because they've based it obviously on Greek mythology and you're getting your powers, your boons from different Greek gods who talk to you, it allows the game to incorporate dialogue quite frequently. Obviously the dialogue, like we've spoken about, is kept very snappy to avoid taking control away from the player for any great length of time. But dialogue is offered fairly frequently, which means that players aren't going through runs for long spans of time without really kind of meeting anyone or talking to anyone. This is something we've talked about before in episodes on Returnal. Well, Returnal gets around this, you're the only living thing really in Returnal, so the way they get around that is by having these sort of audio logs dotted throughout the map that you can find, and in a way sort of the only company you have is yourself, which is quite kind of appropriate for Returnal, really.
Number 2. It's got to be. Then, in the
Ahoy there, little Hades. You recognize your uncle, do you not?
Why not?
The power of the seas should be of help. What I wouldn't give for, say, a healing flask of some sort.
Another great example of the contextual quips that Hades offers, where we're low on health, so as a result of that, Zagreus makes a little mention of it, basically. So we're probably going to wrap up there, folks. Like I say, this is the first episode on Returnal. The second episode will be taking place next Wednesday between 9 to 10 BST, same time, same place. We'll be looking at the late to end game content of Hades and breaking that down a little bit and going into that in a bit more detail and kind of how it offers players what it offers. If you've enjoyed the content for this first episode, please do give the channel a follow or check out my Twitter, which is linked from my Twitch channel, or you can check it out, which is at Arran Topalian. But please do give it a follow if you've been enjoying it. You can also check out the VOD. The VOD will be available right after this stream. It'll be there for, I think it's 14 days. I'm also planning on making a move over to YouTube, where we'll be putting all the content onto YouTube for easier access. So if you have missed most of the episode, don't worry. You can check it all out on the VOD. Perfect timing. Cool. Thanks very much for watching and listening, folks. I look forward to seeing you again next time for the second episode on Hades. Thank you. Good night. Have a great evening.